Hello there, and welcome to this week's episode of AB Plus, the final week on the Ten Commandments, which of course means we have questions on the 10th Commandment, and we'll be discussing those and then try and answer them for you at home. Just at the start, I want to thank you for sending so many questions in and all of your feedback over the past few months. It has been very encouraging to see so many people that have been challenged by the commandments and to see how much is really within them. Obviously, as we are on the 10th Commandment tonight, there's no 11th. So next week we will be doing a little overview, a look back at some of the stuff we've gone through, and hopefully we'll be able to point you in the direction of some good material if you want to study them a little further, and we'll maybe have some guests on for that too, you never know. But back to tonight, and as you can see, we have two guests on again, and I'll let them just introduce themselves now.
I'm Amanda Hannah. I would hope I don't look old enough, but I did actually teach Mark in high school for a very short time. I'm from Kilkeel, from the congregation of Mourne. I thankfully have escaped from teaching. Oh, maybe I shouldn't put it that way, but certainly with the way things have been the last year, I'm very glad I'm not teaching anymore. So I'm a full-time housewife and mum and dog mum, which probably takes up the most time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Leith Thomas, and I'm a member in the Presbyterian Church down in Donaghadee. And I have a passion for mission overseas and church planting. And I do travel a bit overseas. And I do a bit of what I would say humbly preaching in different churches and different meetings here in North Ireland. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Leah, for coming tonight. And just before we come to our questions, then I'm just going to read the 10th Commandment and then a few other verses along with that might help us in our discussion. So, 10th Commandment is in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17. You shall not covet your neighbour's house. You shall not covet your neighbour's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbour's. Then we'll turn to Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Then we 1 Timothy chapter 6 verses 6 to 10. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And we go back to the Old Testament in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verses 10 to 12. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase to eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of the labourer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. Then we have the Gospel of John, chapter 6 and verse 35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. And then finally, we have the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12 and verse 15. And Jesus said to them, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. I know that's quite a few there, but with all of those in mind, we'll come to our first question, which is this. Question 1, how do you know if you're coveting? What does it look like? So
I think very often coveting means we're looking at everybody else and what they have or what they're doing or their situation more than we are looking at ourselves. And I think when we're coveting, we become very past remarkable about what other people have and what they're doing, or we can become, you know, we can feel as though, oh goodness, it's not fair. How come they've got that and I haven't got it? And it can cause an awful lot of discontentment. If I could give an example that might explain this a wee bit, when I was teaching, there was a fellow member of staff, and she would have been very discontented with a lot of things, and she'd no reason to, because excellent teacher, good marriage, lovely family, lots of things going for her, always dressed to perfection. But she would have had this habit, if somebody came in, a woman came in a new item of clothing, she couldn't help but sort of look up and down and take several looks. And it was always the, you know, the feeling that she was looking to see, oh, you have a new outfit again. What that really is something that's important to me. And she would have, you know, don't get me wrong, she would have said, oh, I love your shoes, or I love your top, or whatever. But there was always this feeling that, you know, wanted something more there. And I think in the modern world, it's increased an awful lot with social media. We see what others have through their Facebook or Instagram pages, and it can be something that leads to an awful lot of discontentment, because people don't put the bad things on. They put, you know, the new car or the exciting day out or whatever is the thing that's good in their life. And it doesn't have to be material things that we covet. It can be just, oh, they were out for an exciting day out, or they've been on holiday again, or whatever. And it leads to this restlessness inside, where we forget to look at all the good things we have, but we become obsessed with what everybody else has.
I think covetedness could in some ways be summed up, just following on from what you're saying, Amanda, as being excessive and a regular desire to go after worldly things, whether it be the new shoes, the new rig out, the new car, the new job, whatever. And in many ways, it's a rushing after things that we don't have, which God hasn't provided or wanted us to have. So we read the New Testament about God giving us all different talents and gifts and abilities. And likewise, if we go back to Deuteronomy, God talks about how he's the one that prospers us. So we have to learn to be content with the level of prosperity that God has given to us, rather than letting ourselves be consumed by going after things that God doesn't intend for us to have. And when we allow covetousness then to get a grip on us, well, that then leads on to us becoming greedy. And when we're being covetous and greedy, well, then we're not being generous and we're not sharing with those around us.
I think it's I agree with both of you, Amanda and Trevor. I come across a few years ago in my own life and in my connection with other people, and you know, as you know, I'm from the Middle East, so there it's an issue very familiar. I mean, sadly, it's like what we call nowadays, there's a pandemic and everybody being affected or infected in it. But sadly, many people who have it, they don't even know they have it. They don't even acknowledge they have it. And it's a nice question to start. How do you know that we have it? Well, the answer is those who love the Lord and have God's Spirit in us and God's light. We know when I'm covet. God tell me. God speak to me. And the same things with other people, their own conscience, even those who are not believers. God speaks to us in different ways and different. But sometimes, humanly speaking, and the old nature that we have, which is similar to Adam, he wants to know more than God and he wants to be God. That's nature still, we have it in our own lives as a human being everywhere, from every nature, from every culture, from every nation. And it's that desire to have something, that desire to be wanting something that you don't have it. And it's like eating the person from inside, but they don't know it at that time. And it's similar to what David and Bathsheba. He went upstairs, he saw her, and he wanted her. The man, look, he has everything he has. He has more than what he wants, what he needs. But it's still, he wanted something belonged to somebody else, something he shouldn't have it. And the result was complete disaster and complete ruin his life. And so it's like, sometimes people know it, sometimes people don't know it. And it's that balance in our lives that we need to be careful how to handle our own old nature, and how to let God's nature comes more. And we have to be aware of to let God take control of ourselves, rather than let our own love for our own nature and our own things. And it's come to my mind. It's just come to my mind that's the issue is, or the condition, when in the Old Testament the Lord Jesus talk about, it's not what goes inside us pollute us, it's what goes from inside out. It's what goes from our heart who make us unpure and unclean. So the issue with covet and coveting is, it is not what is there outside. It is, how do I feel? It's that nature that everybody has. Oh, I want more. Oh, I want that because I don't have it. And that's where God says, look, if you have me, I'll give you everything you need. I will satisfy you. And that's where, humanly speaking, we need, if we connect ourselves with God and with God's Spirit, then we can see things not in our own eyes, but in His eyes. To love our neighbor, but not to be jealous of what they have. To love our neighbor in the way that we love ourselves.
What is the difference between coveting and jealousy?
Maybe in a way, following on from what Leith said, the covetousness is the desire in our heart, the desire that comes out of our heart, where we have this desire for more, whatever it is, whether it's material things, whether it's a family, whether it's success, job, whatever. And, that can get to a point where it will consume us, and we're very discontented. I think of another example, and if you haven't watched The Lion King, you're not going to understand this one, but if you think of Scar, I know we love our Disney movies in this house, so hope you're Disney fans, but if you think of The Lion King and Scar, the king's brother, he was already in an exalted position and in a prestigious position, and had so much going for him, but he wanted more, and he was covetous of his brother being the king and of his nephew who was going to be the heir to the throne. And when that came into such jealousy and it moved to that position, then he actually took action against those members of his family. And jealousy really, I think, goes on where we can't be happy for anybody else to have success, and we want to diminish their success, and we won't recognize when they do well, and we we just really don't want them to do well, and whatever they do, we'll kind of put them down and judge them negatively, and it becomes an action. Perhaps the covetousness starts in our heart with us feeling discontented, but then jealousy starts to really eat up, where you're so obsessed with it you can't be happy for other people.
I don't know what to think. This was the one I wasn't too sure of. But I think I agree in the sense that covetousness really comes almost before jealousy. Jealousy is something that nearly you have to, if covetousness is in the heart, then jealousy is really the thing that can lead to this sin and the next sins, because it consists of so much. Covetousness, can actually lead to breaking all the other commandments effectively, into stealing and idolatry and adultery, as well as Leith said with David and Bathsheba. So yeah. Well, then we'll move on to question 3, because we could probably answer that right off the back of that, which is, why is coveting mentioned in Romans 1:29? Is it that serious of a sin right mentioned in among all that list of sins, and is it really that serious? That perspective?
It's not surprising in many ways, because I think someone touched on it earlier about the heart. I think it was Leah, like you said, it's what comes from the heart. And obviously this commandment is one that's very focused on our hearts, because not only does covetousness affect us in our heart, but it affects really everything around us, because we're not limited in what we can covet. We can talk about thou shalt not murder, or thou shalt not steal, and think about that. But covetousness really spreads across the whole realm of life. So you could covet basically anything, and therefore it's to keep us focused on the condition of our heart, and ultimately our relationship with Jesus Christ, and how we respond to what we have, and indeed what we don't have in this life, and yet to be content and to be thankful for what God has given us, just as Paul had said in his letters as well.
That's right, Trevor. And mentioned something, and it's like two sides of one things. The other command, when we do it, it's easy for people to see it because it's clear, and it's easy for God to see it. Coveting or gossiping is something hidden inside ourselves. We do it, we hurt ourselves by ourselves, but also we hurt others. There's a verse in the Bible that said, God sees us, God sees us in the way we are, not in the way we pretend. And he knows if we are doing anything wrong, including the coveting. And it is a serious matter in God's eyes. That's why he's telling us not to do it. If it wasn't serious, he wouldn't bother. But it is very serious, and it's hurting God when people do it. That's why he's telling us avoid it. That's why we can't inherit his kingdom if we do these certain things, including the coveting. And it's the result of it. It just not hurt ourselves, but it affect and it hurt our relationship with others, in our own families, in our own friends, in our own community. But also it's hurting our relationship with God, and it can bring us to a point where one day we will stand in front of God, and then we have to give account of what we say and what we do and what we think. That's why God very lovingly and very kindly is making it very clear to us, before you get to that point, before I get to that point, Leith, be aware of these things. Avoid it. Do things in my own way. Do things in the right way. Do things in the way you want people to treat you. And that's why it's always coming back to the same issue. If I always keep God in my heart, in my mind, in my life, you can't go wrong with that. But if I focus on my desire and my passion to have something, then where is the wrong things that start to grow, and then it will lead to more wrong things. It will lead more to wrong things, and God's trying to avoid us. It's like one I read once in a book a few years ago. It says that someone said to a very wealthy man, he said, "How much money does it take to be happy?" And this is like, it's not maybe coveting, but it's the same desire to have something, to have more. And it says, how much is enough for you to be happy? The man reply, just a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think, as to go back to what you were asking there in the second part of that question, Mark, and looking at Romans 1:29, in our minds, we tend to rank sins as big sins and little sins and worse sins and sins that really aren't that important, but that's not how God looks at them. And, you know, covetousness, we might say, well, compared to murder, that's not a serious sin, but it is a serious sin in God's eyes because it's sin. And as Leith has said, and as we've said previously, because it has to do with our hearts and our desires and basically our goals in life, what we're after. If we're coveting material things or success or whatever, then we haven't our eyes on God, and we're putting something else in his place, and we can't mature and we can't fully live for him while we're seeking after things that are lesser things and not important things, really, in the sense that they're not eternal things. And therefore, we're taking our eyes off the big prize. In a sense, we're taking our eyes off the mission that God has given us of living for him and making him known. But if we're obsessed with, you know, getting our value in life out of things or what we think we should have or we don't have, we're losing sight of what really is our purpose that God has for us. And as Trevor said, if God hasn't given us those things, they're not for our good, you know, they're not for our benefit. And I think so often if we really stop to think of all that God has given us, we certainly wouldn't be so taken up with what we don't have.
Yeah, and I think also, I know maybe we're spending longer in this, Mark, than you had planned, but I think the voice of covetousness argues that we are unwilling to be at God's disposal. And just as Amanda says, we're not willing to follow the Great Commission to go out into the world, to live for Christ and to bear the good news. And in another sense, it's saying that we believe ourselves to be more competent judges than God in knowing what is best for us. So it goes back, someone's talking about Adam and Eve. They wanted to be wiser, they wanted to be God. So there's that desire within fallen mankind that they can guide themselves in their own destiny without God, that we want to put ourselves first. And in many ways, it comes back to something we've talked time after time on this Vodcast series. Covetousness is undermining the sovereignty of God in our lives. And we're taking something from God. We're stealing God's authority and God's sovereignty in our lives and taking it into our own hands, which results in us breaking a whole range of commandments, not just one.
So we see in that answer then, and all those answers, that it is obviously a very serious sin. So with that in mind, question 4, is it ever right to covet?
It gives us legitimate desires, but the thing is that, or the important thing is that those desires are then kept in the rightful place within our lives.
I think as well that if you use the word covet in terms of coveting a greater, closer relationship with Jesus and walking closer to him, then that would be using it in a positive sense. And, you know, Paul in Corinthians encouraged the Christians to covet spiritual gifts. And the other one that I sort of thought of as well was in Matthew 13, where Jesus talks about the treasure and the pearl of great value. And, you know, if we have the kingdom of God as that thing that is of greatest value to us, then, you know, we would sacrifice anything to attain that and to, in a sense, of it after that greatest thing. I don't know that we would often use the word covet in relation to those, but I think, you know, if we positively want to grow, and sometimes that may mean, you know, we look at another more mature Christian, and it's not that we're jealous of their gifts, which we shouldn't ever be, but we could say, you know, I desire to have that closeness with God. That
I think my personal view and my personal answer to the question is it ever right to covet? Well, the answer is only one word: no. If God says no, then it's no. It is wrong. It will never be right. It cannot be right. It's simple as that, and it's because it's something unacceptable to God, but also unacceptable to our own conscience, to our own sense of identity, and even to our own people and community. So its answer is very clear: is not, and it's no. But that's sometimes to feel jealous of something or to wanting to have something, like, for example, if somebody want to have a job so they can feed their family, there's nothing wrong with that. If somebody want to have a car so they can go to work and come back, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you want something that's not belong and is not right and is not acceptable that you should have it. That's where it's become unacceptable, and it's become wrong in God's eyes. And that's where we need to be careful of how to look at the issue of coveting. There is no excuse for it. It shouldn't be there. But sadly, like all the other old nature we have and all the other wrongdoing people have, and including myself, the sin that I was born with, sadly, sometimes this sin manifests itself in us and in different people's life in different ways. But God is very clear: coveting, like any other sins, it is wrong and is not acceptable, and we need to learn how to avoid the issue.
And we'll move on to the last question, which really can maybe we can apply here. What is the cure for covetedness?
One of the legacies probably of being a history teacher is that I love quotations. Some people I know find that probably quite irritating, but I tend to like a good quotation. And I think one of the ones that I've always liked is: contentment is not having what you want, but wanting what you have. And I know that doesn't mention the word covetness at all, but if we're coveting, we're discontented. And I think if we can look around and be content with what we have, and we know that all good gifts come down from God, then I think we would covet a lot less. And I think a practical way of doing that is to develop an attitude of gratitude. And again, breaking that down, I know when we pray, we give God adoration, we give him thanksgiving, but to make it even more practical, I personally find it a very useful practice at the end of every day to think of 5 or 10 things that I can thank God specifically for today. I think in the modern world, we don't have a proper attitude of gratitude. We have an attitude of entitlement more than gratitude. And I think that can lead to so much discontentment. But if we really, like Paul says in Philippians 4:11, I've learned to be content in every situation, which tells us it's not what comes naturally to our human heart, but we can learn to be content and not be always looking for what's missing, what I would like more. And obviously, the more we saturate ourselves in God's word and in building a relationship with him and in focusing on what he has done for us, then we can't be discontented, because our focus is on him and we realize how wonderfully blessed we are, and just how much we have to be thankful and grateful for.
I think we have I think the cure, not just from Christian point of view, but also from human point of view, that we need to acknowledge that we need help, and we need to get to fix our eyes and our heart together, because they both go together. The heart and the eye, they're connected. You can't separate your eyes with your heart. What your heart tell you, what your eyes see, it's connected to our heart. And it's very important that we get to start by seeing what is better, what is good. And certainly the first step is to ask God to help us. It's interesting when in Ephesians chapter 1:18, Paul said, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you will know what is the hope of his calling. In another word, we need to pray that God will come to our lives, God will let us have, and he wants us to have, but we need to let ourselves receive God's life, God's love, God's manner, God's attitude, God's fruits to our lives, so that the more we grow in that, the less we have our own nature, the less we have of the old nature, the less we have of of covet and other issues. And that's just it's a bring us back to an issue of relationship. If we don't have relationship with God, we are not connected. Well, we don't have relationship to all the fruit, to all the good things. And that's mean we have left ourselves open for any hurt and damage that we can cause ourselves by ourselves. And that's where we need to be conscious of that. That's where's our help come from.
I think as well to build on that, and in some of those verses you've read to us, is to realize that if we had everything that we were coveting after, it's still not enough to make us happy, as Leith has pointed out about the rich man, and it's certainly not enough to make God happy. And so what we have to realize is that all the earthly possessions are insignificant in God's eyes. And we have to realize that we are nothing without him. And to get a perspective and to get a cure for covetousness, we need to look at the example of Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah said, "Woe is me, for I am done, because I am a man of unclean lips." And we need to get back to realizing that we need Christ, and that he is more important than all of the things that we can see or that we could covet in this life. And then we become joint heirs with him, and everything that God has created then becomes part of ours in eternity. So we need to lift our eyes off ourselves and all the things that attract us and focus on God and understand where our hearts are, our true condition, and that Christ ultimately is the one that will give us true contentment and will cure us of covetousness.
And I think there's no better way to end than to hear those words as well. Well, just as we wrap up this evening, I think we have run out of time. I want to say thank you to Trevor, as always. Thank you to Amanda for coming along again, and thank you to Leith for coming on, hopefully answering some of those questions for you again. As I mentioned at the start, obviously, as the 10th Commandment, or the 10th Commandment, is the last in the series. Next week, we're going to be having maybe an overview of sorts and hopefully pointing you in the right direction of some material for the 10 Commandments that we have used, if you want to continue learning more. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in, not just for tonight, but for all the 10 Commandments. And hopefully we'll see you again next week. So bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye all. Thank you.